settle yourself down. This is going to be a long, long answer.
What are the advantages to the UK of another Trump presidency?
That's a great question.
Silence.
No, I don't think so at all.
I mean, I think Cameron could have resisted the referendum.
Of course he could.
I think sooner or later a Conservative Prime Minister was going to promise it. I've no idea.
I've no idea. I'm going to go. Welcome to the Newsagents, where we have no idea.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the Newsagents live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at the Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester on February the 24th. And finally, the Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of these dates, and the link will be in the description below. We are so excited to see all of you there.
Hi, Newsagents. Big fan of the show. I listen every day, and I saw you live last week, which was great. My question is, why aren't politicians funny anymore? I'm thinking back to David Cameron telling Corbyn to do up his tie. I'm talking John Prescott chinning his pint. I mean, even Theresa May whipped out a robot. Why does it seem like the current leadership are just so humorless? And is that a problem?
I never thought, I have to say, of David Cameron and Theresa May as being laugh a minute. But there
the comic genius that was Theresa May.
Abbott and Costello.
Yeah.
Cameron and May.
I do think Cameron had good delivery. I think Cameron and Osborne versus Blair and Brown was excoriating. They were kind of vicious but quite funny, and they did deliver their lines well. I don't think that Starmer thinks of himself as being a comedian. I think he worked really hard at that Farage line, didn't he? When he said, "You've been in America so long, I thought you'd be in the immigration queue." I think he really worked. That one was for you.
The person who could do it was William Hague when he was opposition leader. Not that it did him any good in terms of getting close to unseating Tony Blair, but he was very funny at Prime Minister's questions.
Charles Kennedy was quite funny at that
Charlie
time
Kennedy
as well.
was very funny as well.
Stephen Flynn actually was great when he had the third question in the House.
I mean, Trump is really funny.
Yes,
I mean,
he is.
Trump is genuinely really fun and witty. And I mean, like, I maintain that the debate line when Hillary was like, "Well, it's awfully good that someone like you isn't in control of our justice system." He goes, "Because you'd be in jail." Like, straight away remains the best sort of mic drop, sort of off the cuff moment of any
And about, you
I don't think
don't
he
pay
was
your.
trying to be funny.
That's the yeah.
That's the only thing you have to
He's
decide.
not always intentionally funny, but he is disarmingly very funny.
He's quick. I mean,
John Prescott was very funny, not always intentionally.
So we've concluded that politicians actually are quite funny, or can be.
I think
quite
they're
funny.
the same as they always have been,
Exactly.
but this lot are particularly earnest. I feel like they've kind of waited 14 years. They just don't want to screw it up.
I mean, Margaret Thatcher's cabinet wasn't exactly laugh a minute either, was it? I mean, it's not like they've always been
She
hilarious.
was probably the funniest.
She was so on fire. I mean, she, of course, famously had that gag.
You turn if you want to. The lady's
But that wasn't
not
a
for
joke.
turning.
That wasn't a
none
joke.
of these are
She
jokes.
famously, of course, said that asked whether Monty Python was one of us, was a Tory. Like, she'd never even heard of it. She actually thought it was a person. So, I mean, I don't think she was.
But look, hey,
gag-tastic.
what do we know about funny? Welcome to the News
Correct.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And the reason we are having this special edition question and answer session is that we did a live show at the Royal Albert Hall. Don't know whether we mentioned it or not. But we've got some other live shows coming up. And these are questions that were sent in by members of the audience that we couldn't get to. And we thought they were good questions and we would explore them anyway.
So just before we finish, who was the funniest politician that you've ever come across? I mean, no.
Honestly, it's Trump.
UK.
UK.
I mean, I think we said it. It's Hague is funny. Blair's funny.
Rayner's quite funny, actually.
Rayner's funny.
Dennis Healey in his day was quite funny.
Yeah,
he was
Healey
quite
was
engaging
funny.
and entertaining. He had a good sense of
Wes
humour.
Streeting was very funny in a speech which may yet come back to bite him on Tuesday night.
Harold Wilson was funny. But Gerald Kaufman famously said, one of his MPs famously said that, Harold is the only person I've ever met who taught himself how to have a sense of humour. That he had none whatsoever.
love
And then
that.
actually kind of basically just learnt it because he was so smart. He just basically learnt how to be comedic and how to be humorous.
A bit like you, Lewis.
Yeah, and I tell you what, haven't I done well?
God. Let's make it about Lewis Goodall. And let's praise Lewis Goodall. Should we get on with the questions?
Yes, let's do that.
Because so far there's an awful lot of chat and not a lot of questions.
Sophia Shade, or Sophia Shade. Will Musk and Trump's bromance last? Does Musk offer anything more than social advertising to Trump? Is this enough for Trump to keep him close for the next 4 years? Big thank you to Emily, Jon and Lewis for all the work you do on making good journalism and analysis accessible. Listening to the pod on my walk to school makes the colder mornings that much more bearable. I love that. God, I love that, Sophia.
Sweet.
I think it does last, even though, I mean, we had a guest on the US edition this week who said they are 2 scorpions in a bottle and it won't last. It can't last. But I think that Trump has got something that Musk wants, and Musk has got something that Trump wants, and therefore they are sort of interconnected. And although I think it will be rocky, because I think they both like the limelight and Donald Trump can't stand anyone getting in the way of his limelight, I think there is so much vested interest on both sides that they need to find a way to make this work.
And they seem, for the moment anyway, mutually fascinated with each other. It's like they both got a new boyfriend or a new best friend. They're just sort of obsessed with each other. They're interested in each other. You know, Trump is clearly integrating Musk into his family, into the sort of Mar-a-Lago setup. And it is true to say that both of them, and they both must be aware of this, have so much to continue to gain. I suppose the only thing is with Trump, on an ongoing basis, is that I'm really fascinated. One of the sort of sub-themes, or I'm really interested in as the Trump presidency goes on, particularly post the midterms in 26, is how much he sort of loses interest. You know, as he becomes less crazy, or how interested he is in keeping the MAGA legacy alive. Because part of me thinks that actually a big part of Trump would secretly kind of love it if it died with him.
I've got this little fantasy that all the energy is on Musk and Trump right now, and that's all we're talking about, all we're looking at. It's look over here, look over here. Meanwhile, JD Vance is currently running round, actually forging exactly where he wants the American right to be for the next 8 years. Yeah. And Vance is the one who nobody's looking at, and he's not in the limelight, and he's not really being mentioned. And if you were Vance now, you'd use that to your advantage to secure all the parts of the party that you weren't quite sure were pro-Trump, and you'd be locking that down now.
But you can also be sure that, I mean, from the first term of Trump, that the people around him, it's a nest of vipers, and they're all trying to seek preferment. They all want to be in Trump's ear. There will be a lot of people whose noses are profoundly put out of joint by how close Elon Musk is to Trump right now. And they will be trying to sow the seeds of division wherever they can to try and drive a wedge between Elon Musk and Trump. I mean, I still say that on transactional grounds alone, which is what keeps Donald Trump interested in all things, there's enough to keep them going.
But also, because we've not seen a 2-term Trump presidency before, we've not seen obviously the prospect of, you know, we already see it. As Emily said, you know, Vance is already thinking about 28. They'll all be thinking about 28. All of the successors to the crown will be thinking about 28.
This one's
and
done
all
now.
Of them,
I mean, it's done, you know.
And all of them will know and think that as long as Musk continues to control X, that it is the most supremely powerful tool to help narrate and corral power for the Republican presidential primary, which is already basically underway. So they will be, well, whatever happens with Trump, presumably there will be a series of other suitors and courtiers to Musk who will be trying to get their influence and go and kiss the ring.
Or you think maybe Musk is done with X in 4 years' time, and they'll be looking at the next currency, the next platform, the next Rumble.
But that's hard to know right now, right? Yeah. So you want to kind of put that work in just in case he's still there.
This is from James Birdseye. I came to the Royal Albert Hall with my mum Fiona. Love the podcast and thank you for your great journalism and company. My question to you all is, what are the advantages to the UK of another Trump presidency?
That's a great question.
Silence.
No, I don't think so at all. I think there are loads. Yeah. Because anything that happens in America gives the UK, let's say, the advantage of between 2 and 4 years to see what might be happening here. So from the perspective of how populism works, how messaging works, how policies are being implemented, I think there will be people looking to see, has Trump got this, or did he just win it and then lose it? I also think there will be parts of America that are deeply unsettled by, for example, having an RFK type figure. If he manages to get the Department of Health, there will be a lot of interest in, I would have thought, Cambridge pharmaceuticals centres thinking, I think we can be the place for vaccines. I think we can be the place for emerging medicines. If America starts going backwards in terms of what they're actually doing, and God forbid, I do not wish that on any American, but if they start saying no to vaccinations and no to medicines and no to sort of new clinical trials, then we probably become the place that picks up all that.
I think just on a sort of almost simpler level as well, I think that it is true, something Farage says, but it is right. is that I think it is true that Trump is genuinely quite fond of Britain. And, there was that, I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, there was that sort of documentary that's been following him around, and he was on his plane, and he was showing the reporter pictures, like a sort of album of his state visit and his sort of chats with the Queen. It actually made you sort of see, it was quite humbling in a way. He seemed genuinely, and so far as he's moved about anything, he seemed genuinely moved by it. It almost made you quite like him a little bit. You sort of saw a side to him that was different. And I think that there is an element to he's impressed by all that
To be honest,
pomp.
everyone loves the Queen.
But he's obviously
everyone
but
is impressed by the Queen and our royal family.
yeah, but it's clear that it's well documented that his mother in particular, he had great fondness for his mother, and that his mother had a great fondness for Scotland, which he obviously likes, and as well for the royal family, which he has maintained, because not least he's a man of his generation and of his age. So I think if you're to compare that with Biden, for example, who has complicated feelings with Britain, Obama, it was said, I think some of this was much overdone and was a sort of trope of the right in particular, but it's certainly true to say that they had a perhaps more global view, Pacific view and all these things. Trump in that way has a more traditional kind of understanding of the world, and I think that there probably are some advantages and some plays that a British Prime Minister can play to appeal to that vanity and sense of history insofar as he has it that he has.
On the night of the state banquet at Buckingham Palace, when the Trump entourage were getting ready to go to the palace, there was a little pre-party that I was invited to, and it was really interesting because all the most senior people from the Trump team were there. Trump wasn't there and Melania wasn't there, but a lot of others were, and they were all desperately worried about whether they'd got their suits done up correctly, their bow ties done up correctly. With the ladies, they all had long gloves, and they wanted to know, do you wear your rings over or under the gloves? Everything about them and that I had seen up until that moment was, don't give a shit, we'll do whatever the hell we like. And on that night, they wanted to impress, they wanted to fit in, they didn't want to stand out.
I love what I'm going to call the King Charles burn, which is that they've just announced that Buckingham Palace is about to undergo a 10-year renovation costing £369 million, which means no Trump is coming to Buckingham Palace. They can still use Windsor. There, other palaces, as they say, are available.
I predict a state visit invite to Trump is imminent.
Yes. The other thing I think that is an advantage, and this runs counter to a lot of what I think, but us being outside of the European Union now, actually, I think that if there are tariffs being put on steel and other goods from the EU, because Donald Trump has a fixation about Mercedes-Benz cars and why there's so many of them in America, I think that if Britain could somehow be excluded from that, that would be a huge diplomatic victory for the UK, and is not impossible.
Although awkward in terms of our relations with the EU,
yes.
Which is exactly sort of exposes the fault line when I went. But I mean, I suppose the overall picture is we shouldn't overdo it. The fact is that Trump
He'll do what he wants to
He'll
do.
do what he wants to do. He doesn't really care that much about anyone or any country. And also, geopolitically, we know that, like the rest of Europe, a Trump presidency exposes us in all sorts of ways. Ukraine, Russia, all that stuff. He's so unpredictable. So there are far more bits of volatility, instability, disadvantages and our advantages, but it's not to say that there aren't some strengths we could try and play to.
Right, our next question comes from Claire Hallett. Morning news agents, love the podcast, listen every day whilst on maternity leave. It's my window to the outside world. Oh my God, I remember that feeling, Claire. Whilst I'm busy looking after your younger fans, my 16-month-old twin boys.
Start them young, that's what we like.
Exactly.
Bless.
How long have we got to keep this going for then? My question is, what happens if Trump dies, is assassinated, before the inauguration in January? Does JD Vance become president? Who do you think would be his VP pick? Thank you.
Wow.
It's so funny, isn't it, Claire? Because I mean, this is what you might call a sort of 3 a.m. in the morning thought, because we've had plenty of those on maternity leave. But I guess because it's actually been so close twice in 2024, it's not a ridiculous place for your head to go to, right?
It's never happened before that you would have a president die before inauguration. It's happened just after, like 30 days, but never before. I think actually, technically, they would actually continue the certification process to say Trump was president, but that Vance would immediately assume the office at noon on January the 20th.
Because otherwise you haven't fulfilled the electoral wishes of the people.
So technically Trump would be president, but not for a single second because
okay, and so who's Vance's VP pick then?
Well, he'd have to get it through Congress. He'd have to get it through 2/3 in both chambers. It might even be 3/4. I can't remember, but it's a high bar.
Well,
it's
he
not
would.
just a simple
I mean, let's
majority.
imagine that.
Well,
Trump
because the Dems would not allow him to to have who he wanted, there would have to be a negotiation.
God, Claire, you've got us thinking now.
I think if Trump's assassinated, then JD Vance pretty much, he has kind of the nation behind him, and the.
Can we just say that we're not blithely just talking about Trump being
assassinated? We don't want
that
to happen.
We obviously don't want any assassinations, or
we don't want anyone to die. That's what we're saying here. It's just.
No, but the real question is, who does? Let's imagine it's 2028. Who does JD Vance have in mind? Like, who is his? I don't know.
He would go. There's two models, then, isn't there? You either do a Bill Clinton, you have another younger guy to kind of emphasise the fact that it's a young generation, or you go for a Biden type figure who's older and
he goes straight for Don Jr. and says, "This is a memory of your dad."
Yeah. Oh wow!
Yeah.
Well, that
Congress
actually
would never confirm him.
Don Jr. would not be confirmed, but would actually, to keep the MAGA coalition together, would be the brilliant move.
Yeah.
It's just never going to happen. So we don't know the answer.
Like Mike Pence, that made me laugh.
Also, there's a question about Pence.
Come on back,
Biden.
It's fine. I'm not going to hang you.
Kamala. Yeah. That'd be the rogue move.
Yeah, the rogue move.
That'd be the ultimate
government of national unity.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is vice president again.
Claire, you've completely stuffed us. I'm glad that
and Henry and Tristan.
And Henry and Tristan, exactly.
Can we have photos sent in?
I think
Claire, please, of Henry
by the time we
Tristan?
finish this, they'll be well on their way to.
Well, Vance will have been president for a fifth time. The constitution will have been changed. He's president for life, so that's something for Henry and Tristan to look forward
Welcome to your own iPhones, boys.
Right, I like this question. This is from Josie in Brighton. So, who do you think is the most important prime minister of your lifetime, and why? Some of us have fewer to choose from.
I know exactly where you're going to go, John. You've got so much choice because you're such an old fart. Is that what you're trying to say?
Palmerston for you, John? He was very, very important. Died in office.
Very predictable, isn't he?
Who, Goodall?
Yes.
The Goodall gags.
Come on.
The Goodall gag book.
Come on, it's too easy. It's too easy.
But it has to be of your lifetime.
I mean, I guess Thatcher, I'm going to go for it because you're all too young. Well, maybe you were alive for Thatcher.
I was alive for Thatcher. Just
depends
89.
What you mean by important. I mean, sorry to be sort of, the A-level student. Oh, what's important mean? But actually, does it mean important as in life-changing?
You
does
actually
it mean
get no
important?
marks for that on the A-level scheme these days,
What's
by the
that?
way. Questioning the question. No
is that
way.
right?
No.
Do you not?
No.
You fail.
You fail. They wouldn't like that at all.
Oh, really?
No. It's very much more prescriptive now.
I think Thatcher is.
you.
Hang on, I'm going to engage with the question. I think that Thatcher is important
for marks
for the changes that she brought to Britain in terms of changing the balance of the state in a fundamental way, and I think that was a huge difference from Britain 78, 79, before the general election, winter of discontent, public sector unions, flying pickets, strikes, la 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 la.
Yeah, and against that, you can say she was the first person who made it seem wrong to spend money on public services. She started something then which we've never recovered from, which is this sense. Well, I mean, I guess
I'm not saying approvingly or disapprovingly.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that in the fundamental shape of the state, that the sale of council houses, again, arguable whether a good or bad thing, a property owning democracy, a shareholding owning democracy, all those things were things that happened during her time as Prime Minister. And I just think that Britain in 1990, when she left office, compared to when she came into office, was a very different place.
She also, in so many ways, continues to dominate the discourse. Decade after her death, 30 years after she left office, look what happened in the leadership contest of 2022. You had Liz Truss basically cosplaying as Thatcher. You had Sunak setting himself up as a Thatcher. I mean, this would be like people in the Labour Party still sort of comparing themselves to Wilson and Callaghan. Like it would. But her influence, her ideological influence, particularly over the Conservative Party, they've never got over her in a way, and that affects the whole of British politics. Although I would say that although Thatcher is just about within my lifetime, and I sort of hate to say it, but I actually think probably it's Boris Johnson. Just because I think that Johnson. I think it is very credible to say that it's not really when he was Prime Minister, but when he decided to join the Leave campaign to lead it with a 52-48 result.
Well, that's why I'm saying Cameron. I mean, for me, it was Cameron. Because Cameron's decision over Brexit was something that fundamentally changed our lives, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it did. And we don't know the ramifications of Brexit yet, but it did something very, very decisive to the country in 2016.
Dominated politics,
which
still
I think,
does. Yeah.
I mean, I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday about whether you can still feel Brexit, as in, do you still work out rooms as leave or remain? Do you still work out conversations as leave or remain? It's never that explicit, but I do think it actually started to redefine culturally our country. and our relationship with both America and with Europe and with how we talk about politics. And I'm not obviously saying that that was a great thing, but it was a thing.
I mean, I think Cameron could have resisted the referendum.
Of course
although
he could.
I think sooner or later a Conservative Prime Minister was going to promise it. I think that structurally it was going to happen. That was the direction of the Conservative Party. I'm not convinced that Cameron had to do it then.
Probably wouldn't have lost it. I mean,
Possibly
the point
not,
about Cameron was,
But
don't
that's
forget, it was the
Boris Johnson
third.
influence.
Well, yes, but he wasn't Prime Minister at the time. I would say that Cameron, this came at the end. It was his third in a row. It was the gamble after AV, after Scotland, that he thought he had in the bag.
Roll the dice.
Roll the dice.
Again.
It didn't
My
work.
lucky dice.
Yeah, and there were people around him, as we know, as we've talked about, who said, "What the are you doing? Don't do it."
But I also think Johnson, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't think, as we saw, that another Prime Minister would have been able to unlock the Brexit impasse once it had happened other than him. And so it's true, Cameron unlocked it, and
there wasn't a Brexit impasse without him. That's the whole point. Boris Johnson put... No. I mean, think back to Theresa May. Theresa May had a deal that was totally ready to go. The withdrawal agreement was totally ready to go.
It didn't have support.
It didn't have Boris Johnson's support, which is what pulled it.
No, that's not right, because Johnson did support it in the end on the third reading, and they still didn't have a majority support. So it's true to say that Johnson destabilised the parliamentary
I think he destabilised
politics.
it because he knew exactly what he was going to get if he managed to make her life unpalatable.
Of course he did, but I'm just saying that I think that by you get to that point, there is no one else who would have been able to unlock it at that point, and he did, and for good or ill.
I think he locked it. He absolutely locked it, threw away the key, and then said, "Oh, I've just remembered where the key is."
Hang on. Okay, we are now having a debate over Boris Johnson and role in Brexit. I'm surprised that no one has said Blair. But in terms of...
We left that for you, Sweet Pea.
No, well, because I think that if you look at the Middle East today, you could say, how much of that is Blair supporting George W. Bush in the invasion of Iraq, and the uncertainty that has sown, and the way it's destabilised the region. Or you look domestically and say peace in Northern Ireland, and you say Sure Start, and you say minimum wage, and you see some of the domestic policy changes that Blair brought in, which were also pretty fundamental and an answer to the Thatcherite ideology.
But I would love to see how Blair would respond to populism now. I'd love to see if Blair is the mainstream politician that could take on populists now. That would be fascinating, because he is one of the few, genuinely, who had charisma and power at the same time.
And could communicate so crisply. But in a way, that's the thing. I think the reason... Because you're right. I mean, Blair is easily the most sort of long-term dominant of my lifetime, and who was the only Prime Minister that I even could remember until I was about 18, 19. And so that is absolutely true. And in so many ways, he continues to live rent-free inside so many Conservatives' heads. I mean, if you listen to Kelly Badenoch and so many of the others, they constantly go on all the time about the Blairite legal architecture and the Human Rights Act. And to listen to them, and a lot of the people on the new right, they will argue that we've never left that era. But I think the reason why, in a way, the Blair era feels so distant. And it feels so distant because what has followed, basically since the crash of 2008, has felt again and again and again like a repeated set of repudiations of the sort of progressive politics and the sort of politics globalisation, all of that stuff that he embodied and continues to embody. So in a way, to me, that era feels almost as distant as the years of sort of Callaghan and all of that sort of stuff, because it's so far away.
I think we've forgotten in all this debate just what an important meme the lettuce has bestowed on us as
we
a
haven't
country.
said trust, have we? That's true.
And no, I mean
she's the most
actual
important
lettuce.
for the newsagent.
Yeah, for the meme that it has left the rest of the world. She has given us the lettuce by which every other politician and their tenure will be judged.
Right. Natalie, our producer, is in our ear saying enough already.
Yeah,
Go on to the next
right.
question. Right. This is from Jess Thies. What impact, if any, will Trump's success or failures have on Reform's fortunes at the next election? Obviously, a widely popular Donald Trump in 4 years' time would be advantageous to Nigel Farage and Reform. But to what extent would the opposite be true? Would a disastrous Trump presidency have Nigel Farage scrambling to distance himself from his friends and their ideas? Great question.
Brilliant question.
So the thing I was kind of thinking, and it made me think about the conversation we had the other day on the newsagents about Nigel Farage kind of embracing Elon Musk, and Elon and I share a lot of common ideas, and he hasn't offered us any money, but if he were to, how marvellous that would be. Is that the same Nigel Farage that when I came back with Barack Obama in 2016 ahead of the Brexit vote, who was telling Barack Obama to keep his nose out of British politics, and it's nothing to do with you, Americans, what happens?
Suggesting Nigel might not be entirely consistent.
I'm suggesting that there may be a little bit of inconsistency there in Nigel Farage, and I think that if Trump is going down in flames, Farage will be seeking to put as much distance as he can between himself and Donald Trump. But that's going to be tricky.
It's interesting to imagine what flames look like if multiple convictions, rape charges, and an attempted insurrection
to inject themselves with bleach live on television.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. That if you were going back 4 years, you go, oh, well, he's done, right? And therefore, as with many of the Conservatives in this country, they were like, we wouldn't go near Trump. He seems, terrible. Who've now shifted. I remember on the night of the election, funnily enough, watching Malcolm Turnbull, who's the former Prime Minister of Australia, talk us through why Trump would be such a terrible, repeat performance, and why his vote was with Kamala and all the things that she would get done that he wouldn't. And as the conversation was emerging, he sort of grew less and less sort of certain of his own position vis-a-vis Trump, and you've got him saying, well, you just got to have straight conversations, you just got to have these straight chats, you just got to show him, what you're made of, and give it to him straight. I just think people endlessly shapeshift. That is the story of politics, right?
Yeah, I think it's the lights on a sort of theme that I was thinking about when we were doing that show about Starmer and how to deal with Farage, which is that, and we shouldn't underestimate, which is the role of the passage of time. I mean, 2028, 2029 is a long way away. It's a long way away. Objectively, it's eons away politically. And, by 2028, 29, it is at least possible. First of all, the Trump presidency could be considered to be a failure again, which, although, as you say, Emily, like the last one was a failure, it hasn't affected Farage or Trump long term. But, that would at least pose problems, because it would be like, well, Trump has posited these solutions, they haven't worked. How is yours different, right? So there's that. But
well, you could have a Barack Obama type figure on the left that comes from nowhere and just energizes the whole country and makes him look like he's just yesterday's man.
Exactly, in a way that when Biden won in 20, it felt like, perhaps this was the start of a new era. It's entirely possible. It's possible that by 2028, 29, maybe just the kind of the timbre of politics at the moment just feels really different. Maybe it does feel like the sort of long age of populism, which has kind of dominated from 16 to 20.
Maybe populism's burned itself out.
Maybe it's burned itself out. It's totally possible. It depends on what happens. And it's easy to sort of sit in the sort of perennial now and think that it is impossible that politics feels really, really different. And it might. And Farage might look like a busted flat. And in a way, I kind of feel Starmer's, one of his best hopes is that long tail of populism starts to just disappear. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, we just don't know.
Or that people find a response to it. It's interesting that in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro is literally forbidden by the constitution of standing again because of his response to election denialism last time round. America could have done that. They could have done that with the impeachment, and they chose not to.
Yeah, and in Australia, the Prime Minister there, who's a kind of much more Keir Starmer figure, the previous, Scott Morrison, who was the Prime Minister, and populist and Trumpian, nowhere to be seen.
Yeah. Right, last question. In 5 years' time, oh my God, Mark, what are you doing to our heads?
It.
What will the world look like? Will Labour be in their second term? Will Trump have changed the constitution? How much of Ukraine will Russia hold? Will there be a two-state solution in the Middle East?
Nice micro question here from Mark.
Is there hope, or are we doomed? Mark, settle yourself down. This is going to be a long, long answer. What are we going to kick off with?
I think it's short. I've no idea.
I'm going to go. Welcome to the newsagents, where we have no idea.
We can't possibly know if Labour will be in their second term or not.
No.
History would suggest that, over the last 40, 50 years, we've tended to return government. So
is there hope, or are we doomed? We are going to be the hope agents, the agents of hope. We cannot be the doom agents, so we're going to say...
How much of Ukraine will Russia hold? Probably some. Will Trump have changed the constitution? No, because it's too hard. And will there be a two-state solution in the Middle East? Probably not.
When was the last amendment then to the US Constitution?
27th.
It was in the early 90s, and it was a weird thing because basically someone realised it was one of the amendments from like the 18th century on something completely obscure.
Like hanging in Mississippi.
It was completely obscure. It was about how representatives and senators are paid and when they can be paid from. And in the early 90s, some research students realised that this amendment, which had just been hanging around for 2 centuries, was almost ready to pass if it could just get a few extra states to ratify it. And so there started to be this weird little movement to get the remaining states to ratify it, and they did in the 27th Amendment.
This is a very niche answer to an absolutely huge macro question, but Mark...
It's not an answer at all.
Mark, at least you can get up in the morning.
The politician's answer would have been, those are very interesting questions, Mark, but I don't think that's the real issue. The real issue is how did the 27th Amendment come about? And then we go on to answer that. There you are.
We love that one. We love them all. Right, in case you missed the dates, because Lewis Goodall rattled through them too quickly, our live dates are Birmingham, 17th of February, Bridgewater Hall, Manchester, 24th of February, and the 11th of March, we will be in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in the Usher Hall. We are so excited about seeing you.
But for now, goodbye. We'll see you on Monday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.